Hey everyone. Hey, welcome to our very first video here. Just to keep you up to date on my plans. It's really come to mind, or really come to light, I suppose I should say, in educational literature that maybe, these hour-long lectures aren't necessarily the most enthralling thing for us to be doing, not necessarily the thing that's going to keep people's attention for very long. So what I'm going to try to do here this summer is you will see an awful lot of videos that I upload. And this is just because what I'm going to do is for these chapters, I'm going to break these down into more digestible chunks. I'm going to try to keep them around maybe like, depending on how robust the area is, I'm going to try to keep most of them between this like 5 to 8 minute length of time. And then, have them be focused on a specific question or topic so you can stay on topic on there. You can break these things up a little and, you can watch more digestible small chunks of them. If there are things that you want to really, focus on again when you're studying, you can just find those small videos and you don't have to necessarily go searching through everything, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully this works well for you. We're going to give it a shot. You can always feel free in, feedback to me, send me messages if you think that things should be done a little differently, or if you're liking it, just let me know kind of what you're thinking about. So as we jump into it here, we're going to start here, obviously, at the beginning. We'll take this as essentially assuming you don't know much about what this topic is about or what we're hinting at when we're talking about strategy. So, our starting point makes a lot of sense that we first start off by kind of addressing this ultimate question, right? What's strategy? How do we define it? What's it about? And why is it so important? So we're going to start off first looking at this important question, right? Because if we're going to move into being, business professionals, managers, running companies and these kinds of things, if you're going to have any place in business whatsoever, it's really good to understand these strategic questions, because our people who end up becoming most successful with their strategic efforts often understand these questions, why they need to be asked, and the rest of our semester is going to kind of hint at how do we answer them, right? And it's kind of a complicated process in some capacity, but the questions that form our foundation don't need to be so difficult or complicated, right? It's actually quite simple when we start thinking about where these questions come from. First of all, as strategists, as people that are managing or running organizations, we have to understand, if we want to know where we're going, we've got to start out by understanding where we are now, right? And this includes, we'll talk about how to determine all of these things later in the semester, but our industry conditions, what's it like with the other people who compete against us in our same industry? Like, what do the conditions look like? How easy is it for people to come and go in our industry? What type of barriers exist? How easy is it for us to, get a hold of the resources we need? How much bargaining power do we have? We'll talk about all of these elements. We have to understand what the reality of our industry is like if we're going to compete appropriately. We want to understand what those pressures that exist really are, where our market standing is, vis-a-vis our rivals, right? Are we stronger? Are we, weaker? Do we have a leg up on certain people? These kinds of things. We want to understand where our standing currently is, and then understand, based on our market standing, we can usually get a good idea of what our competitive strengths and our weaknesses currently are, because not just emphasizing our strengths, but understanding our weaknesses is really going to be one of the keys to us either being offensively or defensively smart with our strategy as a company. So once we kind of understand what our firm's present situation is like, we can understand a little better about, what direction we think is best for us to head, right? When we're talking about in chapter 2, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of our mission, our vision, our goals. And this really hints at that idea of our goals. What direction are we headed? What kind of goals do we have for ourselves? Because when we understand those goals, we understand what targets we need to set. And, as somebody who often teaches like business psychology, organizational behavior areas, I'm a big proponent of this idea, because we understand that decision making and goal setting are both very heavily influenced by having specific and achievable targets set for ourselves. It's one of the best ways that we can achieve them. So we will look around and explore these ideas about, are there new needs that need to be satisfied by our buyers? Are there opportunities for us to branch out and pursue new avenues? Can we de-emphasize or abandon certain things that we don't necessarily need to go after anymore? Are there elements of our old market that are dying that aren't going to, carry us to a thriving place any longer? We need to know these kinds of things, right? And most importantly, I like this last one. How are we even going to measure success? It's one thing to, think about it abstractly in our mind and say, like, oh yeah, we're going to perform well. But what does performing well mean? We've got a lot of different measures of that kind of success or performance that we can choose from. Anybody who's ever taken anything in finance understands, right? We just have a ton of ways to measure financial performance or success. We just need to understand what it means to us and what we're going after so that we can have something achievable and actionable to set our sights on. So, and then the last, big question that we want to get into is, how do we run our firm in a way that is going to get us to those targets that we've set, right? How can we run our firm and make smart strategic decisions to make sure that we achieve those goals or those targets that we've set for ourselves, right? Because different ways of, defining our measure of success will mean probably different strategic actions that we'll want to take. We need to know what those are so we can align them, right? We want to ask these questions so that we can set up a coherent, aligned strategy to compete and, achieve those outcomes. So we want to understand things like how we attract the right customers in order to get there. What kind of market position are we going to stake out? What's going to be our competitive rivalry approach? These kinds of things we'll talk about in later chapters. And what kind of things, right, do we need to make sure that we set out to do in order to achieve those things? So now that we understand these big questions, we understand hopefully the value of strategy and why we study this, right? Because as managers, when we craft and embrace a strategy, we are definitely committing to undertaking some set of action rather than another. That's really all it is. As we see here in our definition, we're going to kind of use for strategy is it's just our firm strategy is going to be a thing that we define by our specific market position. How are we going to make competitive moves? What kind of business approaches are we going to use? All of these things come together in order to answer this simple question: what's our plan for running this firm and producing good results? After we've answered those initial questions, we know what good results look like. So how are we going to get there, right? Our strategy just helps us, as I said, figure out why are we going to take one set of actions as opposed to another, because there are plenty we could take, right? Sometimes it can be overwhelming, but what we're going after is how can we make this firm successful in the marketplace, and how can we achieve good performance? With strategy, there's really not a whole lot else to it.